Um, I started to think about this subject of fatigue, probably several years ago, because it seemed like almost everyone I was talking with was saying how tired they were. And a lot of them were overdoing caffeine and sugar just to find more energy to get through the day. And I thought, there's got to be another way of approaching this. And one of the things that really came out of researching the book was feeling chronically tired involves more than working too hard or not getting enough sleep. These are really symptoms of a bigger issue. And I found this cartoon recently, Energy is seen on TV, and the caption is, "The active ingredient is marketing." And we all see these ads for 5-hour energy products, and it's basically just a little metal tube full of caffeine. And it's probably the most expensive caffeine on the market. But the fact that it has become such a popular product really is a sign of how many people are running on an energy deficit.
Well, just looking at the incidence of the growth of Starbucks and different parts of the country, there are coffee huts and pop machines and this, that, and the other types of quick energy boosters all over the place.
Yeah. So as I was ruminating on this, I initially came up with 15 major causes of fatigue, and this is how I sort of spelled it out in my original book proposal to the publisher. And then I realized, the average person isn't going to navigate through 15 different issues. And one day I had an epiphany, and I was able to basically group all 15 into 5 groups. And I called them the 5 circles of fatigue. And the circles really, what one really leads into the next. Stress affects eating habits. Stress and eating habits affect hormones. These issues then affect our risk of chronic illness and the aging process. And it just seemed very elegant. And this was actually my original title for the book before the publisher's marketing people got involved in the process. And what I'd like to talk about first is really the first circle of fatigue, which is stress. And a lot of us don't associate stress with feeling tired, but it is probably the single throttle that throws us off in all the other circles. And first question is, what is stress? And I came up with my own definition for the book, and that is whatever throws off our equilibrium, our steady state into a negative way. And sometimes stress is positive, it can stimulate creativity, but I think most of the stresses people deal with really drive us into the ground. And I'm sure you've got your own definition.
Yeah, there is distress, which is the negative stress that tends to wear people out. And then there is eustress, EU stress, which is that which motivates us to try harder, and which sometimes I define stress as the difference between where you are and where you want to be. And that can be a good thing. That's a kind of structural tension that can drive us in the direction of achieving something higher. But when that is perpetually frustrated, when you are not getting what you need and what you want, then you tend to be depleting your resources. Or another way of putting that is it's like having one foot on the accelerator and the other foot on the brake. You're expending a lot of energy but getting nowhere fast. And that will tend to make people tired and frustrated and depressed.
Yeah. And the common stresses, I think we know what most of them are. Work, relationships can be stressful. Money issues, especially during a recession like the one we've been in, really is the number one stressor for many people. And in the book, I really focus on 2 more recent stresses. One is technology addiction, often characterized by staying up till midnight checking email. and looking for my cell phone. And I think people were irritated a few years ago with people who are on their phones and driving. And anyone who's ever driven behind someone on their cell phone knows they're giving more attention to the phone call than to driving because they're always driving slow. Well, what I'm finding now with all the travel I'm doing with lecturing is walking through airports. People can't walk and talk at the same time. And you would think people could do that, two things like that very easily, but they can't. They just are wandering all over the place, and if you try to go around them, they end up wandering right in front of you. And tied in with that is multitasking. Driving, talking on the phone, if you're in an office, checking email while you're eating lunch, while you're on the phone. And all the studies that have been done on multitasking show that it really doesn't work for most people. Only about 3% of us, really one of us in this room is a good multitasker. Everyone else is a bad multitasker. And the studies show that people actually get more done when they're doing one thing at a time rather than two or three.
Another factor in this, which we'll probably get into when you start talking about hormones, but the technology addiction, a lot of people are thinking in terms of iPads and cell phones, but televisions at night and having that bright light flashing, if you've ever watched someone watching TV, the light, it looks like a light flickering on their face. That is disrupting your brain's production of melatonin, and it's taking you out of your natural circadian cycle, and it's disrupting your sleep. And I think technology in general, the world in general, tends to disrupt our natural cycles, and people are getting more and more out of touch with themselves and what their own cycles are in terms of eating, bowel function, exercise. Just the natural rhythms of life are being greatly disrupted by modern life as we know it now, unfortunately.
So part of the message here is to be mindful of stress and to look for ways to minimize it. Not trying to do three things at once, not trying to be on your phone when you're driving, not staying up till midnight checking email, because it's going to cut down your sleep very simply. This was the finding of a study published last week, and the researchers called it social stress, but deep in the paper they said that we're really talking about anxiety. Increases inflammation in the brain. And what we're going to be talking about tonight at the Marriott is inflammation and nutrition. And here's a way that social issues, anxiety, being shy in an unfamiliar group stimulates the production of inflammatory cytokines.
And what we're really not talking about today, but what we talked about yesterday and tonight, is that this inflammation is the basis of almost all of the modern chronic illnesses that we face.
So we're going to move to the second circle of fatigue. And one of the things that happens when we're stressed is our eating habits start to change almost immediately. And if we're working and we're facing deadlines, come 11:30, 12 noon, we'll often delay lunch or we'll skip lunch. And at a certain point, we will have a blood sugar crash. And most people know how to recover from a blood sugar crash real fast, and it's junk food. Because the refined sugars and the refined carbohydrates will get our blood sugar back up real fast. Is it the healthiest fix? By no means. But it is a quick fix, and I'm not recommending it by any means. What happens is you develop a pre-diabetic blood sugar, blood insulin profile, and that further skews eating habits and starts this cycle of just wanting more sugar, more junk food. And then what people often go back to, as we were saying earlier, is this tendency to over-caffeinate. And I'm not really against coffee. I'm just against people having coffee in the afternoon or evening, because when they do, the risk of them having disrupted sleep is very, very high.
One of the first concepts that when I first got to working here at the Riordan Clinic, and that I've worked with continually with patients ever since, and has been kind of a dominant theme in my own health journey, I guess you'd say, is the idea of hypoglycemia. How many of you have heard the term hypoglycemia? And it just means low blood sugar. And all that's happening there is that your blood sugar has dipped, and I sometimes talk about the roller coaster ride that we all find ourselves on. And this dip can be caused by any number of things, but more often than not, it's caused by too much sugar at any one time. And if you eat a big load of sugar and it's more than what your body can handle, you will overshoot. Your body cannot make enough insulin, or there's insulin resistance. And so finally, the insulin will take hold, and then your blood sugar will go dropping down, like you're coming down that long first drop off the roller coaster. And then when it gets low like that, the brain is really a sugar hog. It needs glucose in order to function properly. We don't feel good. We get headachy. We get anxious. We feel nervous, agitated, inflamed, just like this study showed. And when that happens, it sends out a signal to which gland in the body? Which set of glands gets the signal from the brain when we're stressed like that? The adrenal glands. The adrenal glands are our adaptive glands. And the reason it sends the signal there is because our body requires the adrenaline to go to the liver to cause the liver to release glycogen, which is our stored sugar, and then the glycogen is released, and that pulls us back up again, unless we can get to some other source of sugar. And so, but in that process, we'll feel shaky, and we'll feel agitated and whatnot, irritable, and then the blood sugar will go up again, and now we're getting back to the peak and getting ready for the next drop. And so if you do that often enough, and I'll bet you people will cycle up and down like that 6-7 times a day, over the days and months and years, the adrenal glands will literally atrophy, and you start to lose your adrenal reserve, and that's where you get into the chronic fatigue.
We're going to come back to that and discuss that at greater length. How to improve eating habits? Really, the prescription here is one you've heard a lot if you come to these lectures. Really, it's about taking one step at a time, not trying to change your diet overnight. Higher quality protein, which I consider fish, chicken, turkey, grass-fed beef, a lot of high fiber veggies and fruits. And by that, basically anything except potato, really, is what it comes down to. Fewer sweets and carb-based, grain-based carbs. Starting to reduce caffeine production. And you'll see that the caffeine issue is one that keeps coming up in this whole issue. And part of it is there is really a rebound effect from all this caffeine. A couple ways to do this is you can dilute coffee with chicory. Has a very pleasant coffee-like flavor. And you could basically start out with half coffee, half chicory. Another way is there's a commercial mix that the health food stores probably sell called Ticino, which contains chicory and some herbs and has a very coffee-like flavor. And again, you dilute it 50-50 for the first week, and then maybe 75% coffee substitute, 25% coffee, until you really sort of titrate down and get all the caffeine out.
It's helpful to think of caffeine like whipping the tired horse. You know, if the horse can't pull the plow, you get out there and whip it, and after it'll respond for a while, but you're in a sense you're creating more injury, you're creating more fatigue, you're getting a short burst of energy, but at the expense of long-term stamina.
This is a great slide, and part of the dietary recommendations are about eating breakfast. And the Jack in the Box that's really jumping out says, I can't emphasize enough the importance of a good breakfast. He's got the energy and the spring to start his day. And what I recommend for breakfast typically is a higher protein breakfast, an egg, maybe a little bit of leftover roast chicken, some fresh fruit with that. Steel-cut oatmeal has a very similar effect on blood sugar to that of protein, so that's a good protein substitute if you don't like eggs or don't feel like meat for breakfast.
You can also do smoothies, or turning out to be a pretty good way. Use a high-protein whey smoothie with some whole blueberries or black cherries or something like that in milk or some kind of an almond milk. You can. That's a quick breakfast drink that works in a similar way.
Yeah, and there are a number of supplements I often recommend. I do some nutrition coaching, and in our pre-diabetes book, we recommended a number of these supplements. Really, they complement an improved diet to improve blood sugar, and part of the fatigue issue is related to these peaks and valleys in blood sugar. So silymarin, which is an extract of the herb milk thistle, is very important. Chromium, biotin, alpha-lipoic acid, which is an antioxidant, are very good. And then in each of the cells of our bodies, we've got these sort of mini cells called mitochondria. And they are the energy producers of our cells. And coenzyme Q10 and carnitine really drive the energy process. The B-complex vitamins also.
The silymarin is very interesting to me because several years back I did a luncheon lecture like this on the pot-belly syndrome, and which was interestingly enough, the largest attendance that we've had of any other lecture. So what does that say about what people are concerned about? But the main theme of that book is that the reason people get pot bellies is because they have insulin resistance that causes their blood sugar to be too high, and they store calories, unfortunately, in the visceral fat where they really don't want to store it. But what that book also emphasized that I think is helpful to think about is that there can be differing levels of inflammation in different organs. And one of the key organs that you need to be aware of in our time is your liver. Your liver is your detox organ. It's your metabolic grand central station. And if it's inflamed, you can bet you're going to have blood sugar problems. And that's where metformin, which is one of the main medicines that's used for early type 2 diabetes, that's where it works. But silymarin is also a very effective anti-inflammatory agent and detoxification enhancer of the liver. So it really makes a lot of sense to get your liver working as best as possible.
Yeah, and it's really worth emphasizing that two of these supplements, silymarin and alpha-lipoic acid, do enhance liver function. And they've been used for a long time for that purpose. The third circle of fatigue is really about hormones. And again, once we're stressed and our eating habits start to go out of whack, then over the long term, so do our hormones. And there are really two hormone groups here we're going to focus on. The first is the adrenal hormones, and then the thyroid hormones. And I think one of the misconceptions out there is that cortisol, our quote-unquote stress hormone, is bad for us. But we all need it. And normal levels of cortisol are kind of like our insulation against stress. And the trouble is when we're really stressed, cortisol levels start climbing up. And then when we can't sustain these high levels of cortisol, we crash. And that crash is adrenal exhaustion. And it's characterized by abnormally low levels of cholesterol, low energy. And again, how do people compensate? They over-caffeinate themselves. And the whole growth of Starbucks that we were talking about beginning in the early 1990s came with the first high-tech boom. And I was living in Portland, Oregon, which people were calling the Silicon Forest. And a lot of the big companies like Intel were moving up from California. And the software engineers, the hardware engineers, they were working 16-hour days, 7 days a week. And it was caffeine that kept them going.
One of the key functions, excuse me, of cortisol is to modulate the effects of inflammation in the body. And our theme last night in talking to the group was that inflammation can be your best friend if you're sick or injured. The body will use inflammation to help you survive that. But what happens in our time, we've lost the dietary regulators. The diet of modern times has changed so much in the direction of pro-inflammation that now our inflammatory system is way out of balance in the direction of excessive inflammation. And so this is another reason why our adrenals are pumping out more cortisol, because normally cortisol helps the body modulate this very powerful system called inflammation, which can be your friend, but it can also be your worst enemy if you've got autoimmune problems. And so this is another reason why cortisol and the adrenals tend to peter out. They just can't sustain the ongoing demand that's being placed upon them. That's another word for stress, excessive demands, being overwhelmed, constantly being called upon. And after a while, you've given all you can give, and you are exhausted. That's where the fatigue and exhaustion comes from.
Yeah. We're actually the only animals that experience this chronic sustained stress. Biologist Robert Sapolsky, he wrote a book called something like Why Zebras Don't Have Heart Attacks. And when a zebra or a deer is being chased by a lion, if it outruns the lion, during the run, the cortisol and adrenaline levels are off the chart. But if it survives, those stress hormone levels quickly go back to normal. Typical person in an office or someone who's in a service business like a plumber running from one call to another, their cortisol levels and their adrenaline levels are up all the time. They're chronically stressed. And again, we're the only animal that experiences that. I've got a prescription for restoring the adrenals in the book, but I'm going to preface it with the fact that I also have in the book a checklist to help with the initial self-diagnosis of adrenal exhaustion. And Dr. Ron and I worked on this together because some of these things like licorice you probably wouldn't want to take unless you're really sure you were suffering from adrenal exhaustion. Vitamin C and B vitamins, I think we can all benefit from those. They're essential nutrients. They help us deal with stress. And it's the herbs that really require a definite diagnosis. There are another group of herbs called adaptogens, which seem to enhance our ability to deal with stress. Rhodiola, Siberian ginseng, and an Indian herb called ashwagandha seems to be of great help.
One reason you might want to get the book and take that test is that most people would say, well, I would know how stressed I am, wouldn't I? And one of the problems with being human is that we are the preeminent adaptive creatures on the planet. We have survived the highest levels of heat and the lowest levels of cold and all kinds of climates and whatnot, terrible conditions and all kinds of deprivations. So we are very good at adapting to a point. But it's that old experiment, maybe you've heard about this. If you take a frog and put it into a pan of water on the stove and very, very slowly heat up the water such that the frog is adapting to the higher heat as it goes, the question is, would the frog jump out before it got cooked? And that's the question that we have to ask ourselves. We are putting ourselves in this pan of hot stress that very slowly we keep turning up the heat on our own lives as far as the amount of stress that we're dealing with. Are we going to jump out, or are we going to be cooked, is the question.
And a lot of people are being cooked and they don't even know it. Like the frog that chooses to stay in the pot of water.
Of course, they did it. There was a group of guys at Harvard that did the experiment, and the good, hopeful news is the frog did jump out before it was cooked.
Low thyroid is really a complex and tricky issue clinically, and I know Dr. Ron can attest to that. One of the issues is that conventional doctors, I see a deer out back there.
Along the pond there.
Yeah, which is kind of a nice sight. Anyway, most conventional doctors will test for and only prescribe T4, which is one of the two primary thyroid hormones. But the truth is we need T3, which is actually the active form of thyroid hormone. And one of the things I like about the center here is that the doctors understand the value of a full thyroid panel that includes T3, T4, TSH. What am I missing?
That's it. Those are the main ones. Yeah. The whole thing on this is that most doctors, when they measure thyroid, they're only measuring what the gland is producing. And that's the glandular part of the thyroid system. There is a tissue part, a peripheral tissue part that involves the T3, and there is a regulator system because our ancestors were often exposed to starvation. And when there was no food around, this tissue part of the thyroid system would gear down, would slow our metabolism down by virtue of the stress of not having food. But in our day and age, there's no lack of not having food. I'd probably say the biggest stress is too much food and the wrong kinds of food. But when we're under any kind of stress, unfortunately, this tissue system of T4 to T3 conversion kicks in, and people will start converting more of their T4 into what's called reverse T3, and the reverse T3 is inactive. And there is no blood test for this. It's a clinical diagnosis. Sometimes you can use some blood work, but it's a clinical diagnosis where people start having all the symptoms of low thyroid, even though their blood work looks normal. And so this has been completely overlooked in conventional medicine, and unfortunately the major cause of this problem is stress. And if you try to use too much thyroid too fast, and your adrenals are already shot, as so often is the case with people who are coming in with these issues, then they feel overstimulated and the thyroid doesn't seem right either. So trying to get these two systems balanced just right is a real clinical trick that requires some expertise and some working together with a knowledgeable doctor.
Yeah. And really the more rational way of approaching this prescriptively is with a natural source thyroid hormone that has both T4 and T3. Nutritionally, and again, I should point out that in the book, there's another checklist to help with the initial self-diagnosis of thyroid issues, but also the encouragement, go to your doctor, get a full thyroid panel if this checklist is pointing to thyroid issues. Nutritionally, 3 nutrients really stand out. One is iodine. And the term T4 really refers to 4 iodine molecules as part of the thyroid hormone complex. T3 refers to 3 iodine molecules. There's also a T1 and T2. There isn't a lot that's known about them, but in the natural source thyroid prescriptions, they are present and they probably have a role. It's just that the researchers haven't figured out what that role is. The second component, which I really describe as the core to the molecule, is an amino acid called L-tyrosine. And a lot of nutritionally oriented doctors will recommend L-tyrosine as a temporary upper for their patients. and it probably has a whole bunch of roles, but one of them is that it'll support thyroid function.
Well, the other role that it has is that tyrosine is the base molecule that your body uses to make adrenaline. And so if you are overstimulated and overproducing adrenaline, very likely you run out of these precursors such as L-tyrosine. So it's interesting that tyrosine is a base molecule for both thyroid and adrenal molecules.
And then the mineral selenium is needed for a group of enzymes that convert T4 to T3. And there have been a couple of studies published over the last year that have found that people's thyroid hormone levels improve just with very modest amounts of selenium supplements, 200 micrograms a day.
Well, and the other reason why selenium is very important is that we're finding out that the thyroid gland may be the most vulnerable of all the endocrine glands to these endocrine disruptors. And the most prominent of these may be mercury, but there are a whole host of environmental toxins that cause dysfunction in the thyroid gland. And what selenium does is that it neutralizes the effect of toxic mercury in the body, so it allows the thyroid gland to work better.
The fourth circle of fatigue is chronic illness. And as I really thought about this, what I realized was, and it in some ways was kind of a no-brainer, people with serious chronic debilitating illnesses don't have a lot of energy. People who have serious types of cancer, you don't see them jumping around with a lot of energy. And then, there's chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, the more severe forms of heart disease, heart failure, multiple sclerosis, and other autoimmune diseases like lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. Part of what's going on here is we're producing these inflammatory molecules called cytokines, and they can increase fatigue. And then there's the conventional drug treatment, sometimes which is necessary to address some of these illnesses. But I found a citation that noted that 500 drugs, prescription and over-the-counter, can have fatigue as a side effect.
Well, you have to realize that the reason why medications or drugs work rapidly is because they are what's called toximolecular. They have to block something in order to have their function. And so if you block enough things in the body, it's going to deteriorate the overall functioning of the body. Now, the reason people are attracted to using medication is because when you go to the doctor, basically in a short office visit, the best you can do is deal with the tip of the iceberg, because what we know about fatigue is that more often than not, 90% of the problem is below the surface. It's involved in all these things that we're talking about here today, and how that shows up can be different for each patient you see. So there is no simple prescription for fatigue other than what? Antidepressant medications. Most doctors will assume that if you're tired, you just must be depressed. Even though you'll say, well, doctor, everything is going fine, I've got a great family and I'm working but I'm very tired. Oh, well, you must be depressed. Let's try you on a little Prozac or whatever it is. And in reality, that's an oversimplification, but in a short office visit, that's about as much detective work as the doctor has time to do, unless he's going to order some simple things like a blood test to check and make sure you're not anemic or that your thyroid's not way out of whack. But what we find here at the Riordan Clinic is that to really do justice to understanding why a person is tired is maybe a year-long process of several visits and using the laboratory and using various resources to help a person become involved as a co-learner in this detective process to determine what is at the root of their fatigue. Because and I think Dr. Riordan found this out, that this fatigue is complex enough that if you don't involve the patient as co-learner, you're very likely not going to find all the roots that are there for this individual illness.
Yeah, and with this 5 circle of fatigue concept, What's often the case is one of those circles will be the dominant cause of fatigue. Could be stress, could be eating habits, could be hormone imbalances, could be related to chronic illness, or the medications people are taking for chronic illnesses. Again, it comes down to an issue of what can you do. And part of it is eating habits. Again, quality protein, lots of different veggies, basically an anti-diabetic diet. And almost every cancer patient is going to have glucose tolerance problems, as one example. And the University of Arizona Cancer Center is a couple blocks from my home, and the times I've been there, basically they're pushing sugar on patients. And it's the worst thing cancer patients could be eating. And they should be making some really good, healthy, tasty salads.
Everything in modern medicine is like short-term. Let's get a short-term fix, help you feel better short-term, without looking at the long-term. I was telling Jack I hoped we would reach this point in the presentation where I could tell this little story. Steve, how many of you have heard of Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Yeah. And he says one of the worst things that modern education has done is that you can go take a college course and goof off the whole semester, and in the last 2 or 3 days prior to the final, cram and do well enough to pass the test and then call that an education. And biologically speaking, talk to a farmer and ask them whether or not they can wait until September and throw a few seeds out and see if they're going to get a harvest. And I think the proper understanding of how to deal with fatigue is very analogous to how farmers deal with growing crops. It's more like farming or gardening, that you have to prepare the soil, plow it, cultivate it, fertilize it, put the right kind of seed in, make sure you weed it, make sure you do all the things, worry about the rain, worry about all these things that it takes to grow the crops, harvest them, sell them. There's so many steps involved, and yet biologically speaking, that's what health is. Health is not in a bottle. And even the idea that you can just take a vitamin and feel energetic, that's a myth too. So really, lifestyle medicine is the way to improve fatigue, and it involves a lot of thoughtful planning and learning how to take better care of yourself over the long haul in order to overcome it.
Yeah, and this is a good time for me to just reiterate that dealing with fatigue, it really requires a whole diet and lifestyle and hormone assessment. You're not going to find the solution with a single shot of caffeine or a single shot of sugar in one form or another. While on the subject of chronic illness, I did want to mention a couple of supplements that are very important for generating cellular energy in the body. And each of us has about 70 trillion cells, give or take a trillion or two. Coenzyme Q10, carnitine, very, very important for this energy generating process. Vitamin D is very important, not so much in this energy generating process, but we need it to make muscle. And one of the things that happens when people are chronically ill is they lose muscle. And so vitamin D is essential for muscle synthesis. And I think we're really in a renaissance. We've come out of the dark, capital D, ages in terms of vitamin D. And people are now appreciating the many health benefits of vitamin D.
Think back the last time you had a really bad flu and were sick for maybe a week or 10 days or 2 weeks. Most people lose weight. That's a catabolic. It's a breaking down of your muscle when you have a severe inflammation or acute illness or any kind of chronic illness. People tend to lose weight, not in the good way. We're not talking about good weight loss. We're talking about losing that which helps you stay well. And so anabolic is where you're building up your muscle mass and your good tissues, the cells that help you remain healthy. And so things like vitamin D and some of the hormones like DHEA and some of the, like testosterone and some of the sex hormones, hormone replacement therapy, that can be a very effective way to help you maintain good bone, good muscle, good brain, good heart. These are the things that you need in order to sustain health and energy production.
And finally, we get to the fifth circle of fatigue, which is the aging process. And we all age. And as I really thought about how fatigue interacts with aging, first you have the first four circles of fatigue accelerating the aging process, if those first four circles are really kind of like out of whack. And then the inevitability of the aging process actually works the other way. It puts more pressure on the first four circles because the adrenals of a 70-year-old aren't as good as a 20-year-old. There's a greater risk, I think, of adrenal stress. I find seniors tend not to have enough protein in their diet. And part of this is because their appetites are not as good as they were. They end up eating less when they should actually be eating reasonable amounts of nutrient-dense foods. Again, high-quality protein, a lot of veggies. Hormone levels tend to decrease with age. And of course, the risk of chronic illness increases with age. You've got free radicals and antioxidants that can help preserve our genetic material. They reduce genetic damage. The B complex vitamins are involved in cell replication. Every time we make a new cell, whether it's for growth or if it's to heal a cut, we basically need new DNA, which comes from existing cells, and the B vitamins play a very important role in cell replication.
The way I came to work here at the Riordan Clinic is I was the medical director of a nursing home in Salina for 5 years, and I could see a lot of elderly patients, when they began to have symptoms, rather than thinking about what were the underlying causes, okay, here's a medication to treat that symptom. And the medication itself would have side effects, which would just be very easy to call the doctor and get another medicine to treat the side effects of the first medicine. But what you see in a nursing home setting is loss of everything, loss of activity. So you're losing muscle mass that way. You're lying around in bed a lot or sitting in the chair a lot. That has been shown to very clearly use up muscle mass quickly.
You're not getting exposed to the sun, so you're not making
vitamin D levels are in
D.
the tank. The food quality isn't always the greatest at a nursing home setting. A lot of starchy type foods. Certain meaning, loss of relationships, loss of meaningful work. All kinds of things are being lost. And so it's no wonder that it's not unusual to walk into a nursing home and just feel kind of depressed because of the atmosphere and the fact that everyone is basically waiting to die, is what it sometimes seems like to me. And so I really think as a society we need to rethink what it means to get old and how we deal with the problems of aging in this light of, because people, as they do get old, do get tired. But how are we going to treat that? There should be a better way to approach it. And we all know people who are in their 80s or 90s and they're living a high vitality life. And so it is possible to do. And I'm just going to challenge everyone here that make that your goal. Stay involved in a high level of energy and vitality and use that as a barometer for how well you're doing. And if you're really tired, you need to be thinking about some of the stuff that we're talking about here today.
Yeah, and I've got a very simple prescription for maintaining muscle. And I think it's after the age of 30 or 40, we lose about 1% of muscle per year, unless we're really aggressively trying to maintain it with exercise and diet. And after age 60, the loss of muscle goes up to 2% per year, and then double that after age 70. So you can see it's a downward slope, and it really does require some effort to maintain that muscle. The short prescription, vitamin D again, quality protein. And if there is one supplement for this specific purpose, it would be the amino acid leucine, Leucin, which seems to promote the conversion of protein to muscle.
Yeah, and all the hormones, things I mentioned earlier, like thyroid, DHEA, there's the various sex hormones, hormone replacement therapy, new interest in stimulating the pituitary to make growth hormone in a safe way. All of these things are muscle protective as well.
So what else can you do? Calorie restriction. There's a lot of research showing that calorie-restricted diets do increase life expectancy. And the way I look at it is most people are eating too much anyway. So a little calorie restriction would probably be good for all of us. Physical activity, and really the message I have in the book about physical activity, I try to avoid the E word since it's such a turnoff, is if you haven't engaged in physical activity or exercise, just start with a daily walk. Go a comfortable distance and a comfortable pace. And if you can do it every day or almost every day, you'll see that after a couple of weeks, your pace and distance increase. And these are good things. Sleep issues. Limit caffeine, especially in the afternoon and evenings. Stay away from late night email. If it's a must because of work, try to avoid the real long emails. A lot of things to enhance sleep and sleep quality. Melatonin has been called the Dracula hormone because its levels are supposed to increase toward nightfall and then taper off toward morning. 5-HTP, which is a form of the amino acid tryptophan. GABA, which is short for gamma-aminobutyric acid, has a relaxing effect. So does theanine, which is found in green tea. And magnesium is very good. Magnesium is a great muscle relaxant. And so if you're stressed, a little bit of magnesium before bed can help you unwind a little bit because a lot of people store that stress in their muscles.
One of the best things that I think you can all do, that especially as you get older, it's a natural thing, but really establish a good routine of getting up at about the same time every morning, eating your meals about the same time, and going to bed about the same time, and using kind of an evening routine that you stick to. I think it's actually healthy in this stage of your life to be a bit boring and actually have these kind of get these cycles going again. And if you can establish those habits will actually serve you. And what do we call a habit that we have established in our lives that we do on a regular basis? A virtue. It's a virtue. So these are physical health virtues that you can cultivate, much like the farmer is cultivating his field. You want to cultivate habits of health that will help you maintain these cycles.
In some, fatigue or tiredness can have many different causes. Really think about which of these 5 circles of fatigue impacts you the most. No single quick fix is likely to help. It really does require some thought, maybe some medical testing, and maybe some lifestyle modification. Really the key here, again, is to think holistically and to treat fatigue holistically. Stress, diet, hormones, chronic illness, aging.
Is that all? I think what we'll do at this point, we'll take questions.
Oh, we have one more cartoon. And with all the talk about the Tea Party and all the anger associated with this, here's a great cartoon about the herbal Tea Party. Calm down, cool out, relax, count to 10, be mellow. And as Dr. Hugh Riordan, the founder of the center, used to tell me, just taking 3 or 4 deep breaths will change your whole biochemistry. And he was right. And now I end up telling that to other people.
Okay, at this point, I think we'll take questions, and I'll be the guy to go around with the mic. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and we'll take your question.
I have have a question about some of the protein powders like people put in smoothies and such. They're usually either whey or soy. I can't do dairy, so I kind of just eliminated the whey. But is there good and bad soy products?
Well, unfortunately, I was going to say whey is better than soy, but if you're allergic to it, it's not going to be good. In general, I'm not crazy about a lot of the soy products, and I think if you look to how the Japanese have used soy, I think they're using it the right way. And it's fermented. It's essentially pre-digested by bacteria. And soy burgers, things of that sort, soy drinks, don't go through that process. One approach might be to mix it with some probiotics to just give your gut an extra boost in terms of breaking down those soy proteins and seeing if they work, if they help. One of the difficulties with a lot of the soy products is there are various sweeteners added to them, which I try to discourage people from consuming.
There's getting to be more protein powders like hemp protein, PEA protein, and spirulina has been around for a while. And so you can kind of look and try those out, see what kind of success you can have with that. Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay. One circle you didn't mention, which I have, is physical problems with your endocrine system, like growths or something like that. They also cause all these problems that you're mentioning. And I've been reading a lot about bromine that's added to foods, really raising havoc with the thyroid, especially in America, because we add it in so many foods. Would you address that a little?
Yeah, and I'm going to defer to Dr. Ron on this one.
Yeah, it turns out that here, especially in the Midwest, or actually all parts of America, but especially in the Midwest, we have a huge iodine deficiency problem. Yes, there is a little bit of iodine in salt, but a lot of people cut back on their salt. The iodine that's in salt is not very absorbable. There's enough there to prevent goiter. But it used to be that bread was made with iodine. But then there was this kind of like iodine scare, or what one author calls iodophobia, where people became afraid of iodine as if it was something bad, even though it's been a very useful medical treatment for several hundreds of years. But they replaced the iodine with bromine. It's a halogen. It's a toxic halogen, and it tends to interfere with the normal functioning of the thyroid. And then you add that on to the mercury and to the lead and to the other plastics and various organophosphate chemicals that are in the environment. Our endocrine system is really under attack, and so there are a lot of reasons why the endocrine system is malfunctioning for people. Then throw in the stress and the medications and the poor diet, and there's a lot of reasons why the healthcare reform system, unfortunately, is kind of misguided. We're trying to correct this as if it were an insurance problem, but in reality, it's just that the overall health of Western countries is going way down very rapidly. And so I've been telling people, instead of healthcare reform, we need self-care reform, because there's not going to be enough provided by the conventional medical system to help you figure this all out. You just have to become more actively involved in figuring some of this out, getting help from practitioners, using conventional doctors. I mean, it's not to say that there isn't a place. There definitely is a place, but I think the term integrative medicine, where you're using the best of both worlds, is probably the best way to approach a lot of these things. Bromine is especially in breads, and let's see, that's the main one I'm aware of. I don't know if it shows up. I haven't looked. I know that there's you can't hardly find a bread that doesn't have fructose corn syrup solid in it, so it's hard to get good breads these days. Make your own.
Could you comment about the high fructose corn syrup issue and how that's affecting especially our youth?
Oh, I've got kind of like two dietary evils I come back to in most of my books, and one is high fructose corn syrup, the other is trans fat. And both do a real number on our biochemistry. Gary Taubes, who has written a couple of books, and he recently did a big article for the New York Times, basically saying regular sugar and high fructose corn syrup aren't all that different. They're both bad. But when I talked with him a couple months ago, he did say he really tries to avoid high fructose corn syrup. It's really a synthetic product. The typical formula that's used in soft drinks and breads and other products is 55% fructose, 45% glucose. The extra fructose gives it a much sweeter taste. But there's a lot of research that says high fructose corn syrup alters the appetite centers of the brain. The fructose is metabolized differently from the glucose. The fructose is metabolized in the liver where it will increase triglyceride levels. I mean, the list goes on and on. I've done a couple of articles on high fructose corn syrup for dlife.com. This is a website for diabetics. Just the letter D, life, life.com. And after one of the articles appeared, we got letters from the Corn Refiners Association. And what they really wanted us to do was either take down or rewrite the article. And my editor said, well, what do you think? And I said, you know, they've got a financial interest here. I don't have any. I'm just going by the research. And we basically kept the articles up online.
If you want the ultimate on this, just go to YouTube and type in Robert Lustig, Lustig, which is getting now about, this one video is getting about 50,000 hits a month now. And it's really the ultimate discussion. I actually had the pleasure of hearing him in person about 2 months ago in San Francisco. And he really lines it out both in layperson terms, but later on in the talk he goes into the whole biochemistry of why it is devastating in a subtle way.
Yeah, and part of it is its effect on liver function. And when you look at our health, I mean, the liver is the body's factory for making chemicals, for detoxifying chemicals. And if you consume something that interferes with liver function, a whole lot of things are going to go wrong. And first among them is glucose tolerance. And you know, I'll just go into this real fast. Most people, when they think of blood sugar, think in terms of the pancreas. But your blood sugar is really regulated in tandem by the pancreas and the liver. And you know, people who are overweight or are type 2 diabetic tend to have fatty livers. High fructose corn syrup increases the formation of fat in liver. As fat builds in livers, you have a decrease in liver function. I mean, it just goes on. I could write a whole book about high fructose corn syrup. Yes, they are. Yeah.
Madison Avenue approach to health.